Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture on matrix multiplication. This one is going to be a very important topic within this section of linear algebra. So please pay attention, and by the end of this lecture you will have a complete understanding on within what circumstances and how do we multiply between two different matrices or a matrix with a vector. So before we go ahead and see the process of multiplication in matrices, it is important to understand that we can multiply a matrix with another matrix or a vector only if certain conditions are being satisfied. So let's try to understand that part first. Please pay your attention to this part here. Let's say that we have a matrix A that has m number of rows and n number of columns. On the other hand, we have a matrix B which has n number of rows and p number of columns. And if you are given to multiply between these two matrices, then you must understand that you will be able to do this multiplication only if the number of columns in A matrix is equals to the number of row in B matrix. Only in that case this multiplication is possible, otherwise you will not get an output. And let's say that if this condition is being satisfied, in that case the output that you will get after doing the multiplication, its shape will be number of rows in A matrix by number of columns in B matrix. So as we can see, A matrix has m number of rows and B matrix has p number of columns. This is why the output we have has a shape of m by p. Now, in order to understand this concept in more details, let's try to understand this example here. So I have taken this example of multiplication between this matrix and this vector, and our matrix has 3 rows and 2 columns. Similarly, the other one has a shape of 2 by 1. So as you can see, these two values are same. This is why the multiplication between these two is possible. And let's go ahead and see that what is happening behind the scene when we are trying to multiply these two. So it happens in such a way that first we will take the first row from this matrix, and this will be multiplied first with the column of the other one. So as you can see, 7 is being multiplied with 4, as you can see here, and then 8 is being multiplied with 2, as we can see here, and then we simply sum them up. And the same thing we will do with the other row, and we have 5 and 6 as an element in the second row. So 5 will be multiplied with 4 like we see here, and then 6 will be multiplied with 2. So 6 is multiplied by 2, and then again we sum them up. And exactly the same thing happens with the last row as well. So 3 multiplied by 4, 4 multiplied by 2, and we are summing them up. And after the multiplication, when we add both the products, we get this final output, which has a shape of 3 rows and 1 column. And if you pay attention, this first matrix has 3 rows and the second one has 1 column. And this is why the final output has a shape of 3 by 1, exactly as we discussed over here in the theory part. Now also, let's quickly go through this last example. So we have the first matrix of 3 by 2 and the second one is 2 by 2. As we can see, number of columns in the first matrix is equals to the number of rows in the second matrix. Hence the multiplication is possible, and the output shall have a shape of 3 by 2. So if you can see here, this final output has a shape of 3 rows and 2 columns. And if you talk about the operation going behind this multiplication, then we are doing exactly the same thing as we were doing in the previous example. However, this time, after doing the multiplication of this first row and first column, like we see here, we do the same thing with this first row and second column as well, as we can see over here. And similarly, again we will multiply this second row with both these columns, and same thing will happen with third row as well. So I leave it to you to pause the screen and have a look on this calculation, which is pretty much self-explanatory, and this should be it. Now let's quickly move into the Jupyter Notebook to cover the practical part of this lecture. So here I'm creating a new matrix, matrix A, and if I'll execute this, you can see it has a shape of 3 by 2, and in the next cell we have a vector, exactly the way we have seen in the previous example here. However, in Jupyter we do not see this in a form of a column, it is showing us in a form of a row vector. Anyways, the operation is going to be exactly the same. So first this row will be multiplied with these two, then the second row will be multiplied with these two, and then so on with the third row. So if I use this syntax, then it will help us to get the multiplication output between A and B. So if I'll execute this, you can see we have the same output, 44, 32 and 20. So if we quickly check the previous example, you can see we had 44, 32 and 20. So we are getting the same output, but on Jupyter it is not showing as a column because this one is a one-dimensional array. Now let's create a new matrix in this new cell. So if I will simply execute this, you can see we have a 2 by 2 matrix. So number of columns within this matrix is 2 and number of rows within this matrix is also 2. So the multiplication should be possible. Again, if I use this syntax, you can see we have this output which is exactly the same we have seen in the theory part over here. So this is it for today's lecture. In this lecture, we have pretty much understood that how multiplication operation happens in terms of a matrix, but it is also very important to understand that how this operation happens behind the training of a machine learning model. So that concept is so important that I am going to create a dedicated lecture for that. Hence in the next video, we are going to see that how the same operation happens behind the training of a model in order to achieve a prediction. And it is my request that you please do not miss that lecture, because that will help you a lot to understand the basics of convergence or gradient descent in machine learning. Please drop a like below if you found this video helpful and subscribe to the channel if not yet subscribed. And I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.